Maria Santos had always been different from the other girls in her small town of San Miguel. While her friends spent their afternoons gossiping about boys and planning their weddings, Maria would sneak out to watch the local military training exercises from behind the old oak tree near the base fence. Something about the precision, the discipline, and the honor of military service called to her in ways she couldn't fully explain. Her father, Carlos Santos, was a respected mechanic who had served briefly in the army during his youth. He often told stories of camaraderie and courage around the dinner table, but whenever Maria expressed interest in military life, his face would darken. "That's no place for a woman," he would say firmly. "A woman's strength lies in her heart and her home, not on a battlefield." Maria's mother, Elena, would nod in agreement, adding, "Mija, you have such beautiful hands. They're meant for healing, for cooking, for raising children, not for holding weapons." The conversations always ended the same way, with Maria excusing herself to her room, where she would stare at military recruitment posters she had secretly collected and hidden under her mattress. The year was 1995, and while women had been allowed in certain military roles for several years, the idea of a young Latina woman from a traditional family joining the army was still met with raised eyebrows and whispered conversations in their community. Maria's parish priest, Father Miguel, had even approached her parents expressing concern about their daughter's unusual interests. Despite the opposition, Maria's determination only grew stronger. She began running every morning before dawn, following the same route she had seen soldiers take during their training runs. She would do push-ups and sit-ups in the privacy of her bedroom, building strength while her family slept. At the local library, she spent hours reading military history books and studying maps of famous battles. Her best friend, Carmen, thought she had lost her mind. "Maria, why would you want to put yourself through all that pain and suffering?" Carmen would ask while painting her nails. "My cousin Roberto says the drill sergeants are monsters who scream at you until you cry. And the food is terrible. Plus, you'll be surrounded by rough men who don't respect women." But Maria had a secret that kept her going. 6 months earlier, while walking home from work at the local grocery store, she had witnessed an attempted robbery. An elderly man named Don Pedro was being threatened by 3 young criminals who wanted his pension money. Without thinking, Maria had grabbed a broken piece of pipe from a construction site and confronted the attackers. "Leave him alone," she had shouted, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. The would-be thieves, caught off guard by her sudden appearance and fierce determination, had fled into the night. Don Pedro, grateful and shaken, had looked at her with tears in his eyes and said, "You have the heart of a warrior, young lady. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That moment had changed everything for Maria. She realized that courage wasn't something you were born with or without. It was something you chose again and again, even when you were terrified. As her 18th birthday approached, Maria made a decision that would shock her entire community. She walked into the Army recruitment office in the nearby city, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. The recruiting sergeant, a weathered man named Sergeant Johnson, looked up from his paperwork with surprise. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, clearly not expecting a young woman to walk through his doors. "I want to enlist," Maria said, her voice steadier than she felt. Sergeant Johnson studied her for a long moment, taking in her small frame and nervous energy. "The military isn't summer camp," he said seriously. "It's demanding, physically and mentally. Many men struggle with the training. Are you sure you've thought this through?" Maria straightened her shoulders and met his gaze directly. "I've been thinking about nothing else for 2 years. I know it won't be easy, but I'm ready." The recruitment process took several weeks, during which Maria had to undergo physical and psychological evaluations. Each test felt like a small victory, but she knew the real challenges lay ahead. When she finally told her parents about her decision, the reaction was explosive. Her father's face turned red with anger and disappointment. "This is madness, Maria. You're throwing away your life for what? To prove some foolish point? Women don't belong in the army." Her mother cried for 3 days straight, convinced that her daughter had been brainwashed by feminist ideas she had picked up somewhere. The entire extended family became involved, with aunts and uncles calling to express their shock and disappointment. The worst part was the reaction from her community. Word spread quickly in the small town, and wherever Maria went, she could feel the stares and hear the whispered conversations. Some people thought she was brave, but many more thought she was foolish or trying to bring shame to her family. At church, the disapproval was particularly harsh. Several older women approached her mother, offering unsolicited advice about how to talk sense into her daughter. The baker, Mrs. Rodriguez, actually refused to serve Maria when she came in to buy bread, saying she didn't approve of her unnatural choices. Despite all the pressure and criticism, Maria refused to change her mind. She had passed all the initial requirements and was scheduled to leave for basic training in 6 weeks. Every night, she would lie in bed listening to her mother's muffled sobs from the next room, wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. 2 weeks before her departure date, something happened that nearly shattered her resolve completely. During a family gathering for her cousin's quinceañera, her uncle Roberto, who had always been one of her favorite relatives, pulled her aside for a private conversation. "Maria, I need to speak honestly with you," he said, his face grave with concern. "I served in the army for 8 years, and I know what you're walking into. The physical demands alone will break you. You're a small girl, and the other recruits will be strong men who have been preparing for this their whole lives." He paused, placing a heavy hand on her shoulder. "But that's not even the worst part. The psychological pressure, the hazing, the constant testing, it's designed to weed out the weak. And I'm sorry to say this, but women are naturally weaker, both physically and emotionally. You'll become a liability to your unit, and you'll put other soldiers in danger." His words hit Maria like physical blows, each one designed to break down her confidence and resolve. "Your parents are suffering because of this selfish decision," he continued. "Your mother hasn't been able to sleep properly in weeks. Is your pride really worth destroying your family's peace?" That night, Maria sat alone in her room, staring at the acceptance letter that would change her life forever. Doubts crept into her mind like poisonous whispers. What if her uncle was right? What if she really wasn't strong enough? What if she failed spectacularly and proved everyone right? She thought about the comfortable life she could have instead. She could marry her boyfriend, Jorge, who had been pressuring her to give up her crazy military dreams and settle down. She could work at the grocery store, raise children, and live the life everyone expected her to live. But then, she remembered Don Pedro's words, "You have the heart of a warrior." She thought about all the women throughout history who had been told they weren't strong enough, smart enough, or brave enough to pursue their dreams. She thought about the girls in her community who would watch her leave and maybe, just maybe, realize that they had choices too. The next morning, Maria made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of backing down, she doubled her training efforts. She started running longer distances, doing more push-ups, and reading everything she could about military strategy and history. If people questioned her courage and capabilities, she would prove them wrong through preparation and sheer determination. 3 days before her departure, her father finally broke his silence. He found her in the backyard doing push-ups in the early morning darkness. For several minutes, he just watched her, his expression unreadable. "You're really going to do this?" he said finally. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Papa," Maria replied, not stopping her exercise routine. Carlos stood quietly for a long moment before speaking again. "I still think you're making a mistake. But I've watched you these past few weeks, and I see something in you that I didn't see before. You have a determination that reminds me of your grandmother." He was referring to Maria's paternal grandmother, Rosa Santos, who had raised 7 children alone after her husband died in a mining accident. Rosa had worked 3 jobs and somehow managed to send all her children to school, becoming a legend in their family history. "If you're determined to do this," Carlos continued, his voice thick with emotion, "then you need to know that no matter what happens, you'll always have a home here. Your mother and I may not understand your choices, but you're our daughter, and we love you." For the first time in weeks, Maria stopped her exercises and hugged her father, both of them crying quietly in the pre-dawn darkness. The day of departure arrived with unseasonable rain, as if the sky itself was crying for the difficulty that lay ahead. Maria's entire family gathered at the bus station, a mixture of pride, fear, and uncertainty visible on every face. Her mother had packed enough food for a week, pressing the bag into Maria's hands with trembling fingers. "Promise me you'll be careful," Elena whispered, her voice breaking. "Promise me you'll come home." "I promise, Mama," Maria replied, though they both knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. As the bus pulled away from the station, Maria pressed her face against the window, watching her family and her entire previous life disappear into the distance. She was heading toward an unknown future, armed with nothing but determination and a fierce belief that she could prove everyone wrong. She had no idea that in just a few months, she would find herself standing before Colonel James Harrison, one of the most respected and feared officers in the Army, facing a test that would determine not just her military career, but her entire understanding of what she was capable of achieving. The bus carried her toward a destiny that would challenge every assumption her community had about women, courage, and the meaning of true strength. But first, she would have to survive the brutal crucible of basic training, where her courage would be questioned every single day, and where she would discover reserves of strength she never knew she possessed. Fort Benning, Georgia, looked like something from Maria's worst nightmares as the bus full of new recruits pulled through the main gates. The facility stretched endlessly in every direction, filled with identical brown buildings, obstacle courses that looked like medieval torture devices, and groups of soldiers moving in perfect formation with mechanical precision. The moment Maria stepped off the bus, the reality of her decision hit her like a physical blow. A drill sergeant with muscles the size of tree trunks, and a voice that could shatter glass immediately began screaming instructions that seemed designed to confuse and intimidate rather than inform. "Listen up, maggots," Drill Sergeant Williams bellowed, his face inches from the nearest recruit. "You are no longer civilians. You are no longer individuals. You are now the property of the United States Army, and for the next 16 weeks, your life belongs to me." Maria found herself standing in a line with 47 other recruits, and it quickly became obvious that she was not only the only woman in her group, but also the smallest person by a significant margin. The men around her looked like they had been preparing for this moment their entire lives, with broad shoulders, thick necks, and confident expressions that suggested they knew exactly what they were getting into. The recruit standing next to her, a tall young man named Dave Peterson from Minnesota, glanced down at Maria with poorly concealed skepticism. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" he whispered during a brief moment when the drill sergeant's attention was elsewhere. "The women's auxiliary might be more your speed." Before Maria could respond, Drill Sergeant Williams appeared in front of them like a predatory animal sensing weakness. "Did I give either of you permission to speak?" he roared, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. "Drop and give me 50 push-ups. Both of you." As Maria lowered herself to the ground and began the punishment exercise, she could feel the eyes of every other recruit on her. Some looked sympathetic, others seemed annoyed that her presence had already gotten them in trouble, and a few appeared openly amused by what they clearly saw as an impossible situation. The first few days of basic training were a blur of physical exhaustion, mental pressure, and constant humiliation. Every morning began at 4:30 with a wake-up call that sounded like the world was ending, followed by physical training that pushed Maria's body beyond what she thought were its absolute limits. The other recruits quickly formed friendships and alliances based on shared backgrounds or similar physical capabilities. Maria found herself increasingly isolated, not because anyone was deliberately cruel to her, but because she simply didn't fit into any of the natural groups that formed among the men. During meals, conversations would stop when she sat down at a table, not out of hostility but from simple awkwardness. Most of these young men had never been in close quarters with a woman who wasn't a girlfriend, sister, or mother, and they had no idea how to act around someone they were supposed to treat as an equal soldier while still maintaining their ingrained ideas about how to behave around women. The physical challenges were even more difficult than Maria had anticipated. During the first week, they were required to complete a 2-mile run in under 16 minutes. While most of the men finished with time to spare, Maria crossed the finish line with just 30 seconds remaining, her lungs burning and her legs shaking with exhaustion. Drill Sergeant Williams made note of her time on his clipboard, his expression unreadable. "Santos," he called out after everyone had finished. "See me after chow." That evening, Maria reported to the drill sergeant's office with her heart pounding in her chest. She was sure this was the moment when she would be told that she wasn't cut out for military life and would be sent home in shame. "Sit down, recruit," Williams said, his voice notably quieter than his usual battlefield roar. "I'm going to be straight with you because I think you can handle it. Your run time today was barely acceptable, and that was with you pushing yourself to what looked like complete exhaustion." Maria started to respond, but he held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not finished," he continued. "The thing is, barely acceptable isn't good enough here. In 6 weeks, you're going to be required to complete that same distance carrying a 40-pound pack and your weapon. 2 weeks after that, you'll need to do it while wearing full gear that weighs more than you do." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with experienced eyes that had evaluated thousands of recruits over the years. "I've seen plenty of tough guys come through here who look like they could bench press a small car, and some of them washed out because they didn't have the mental strength to push through when things got really difficult. You've got something in your eyes that tells me you're not going to quit, but wanting something and being able to achieve it are two different things." Maria finally found her voice. "What are you saying, Sergeant?" "I'm saying that if you want to make it through this program, you're going to have to work twice as hard as everyone else. Not because you're a woman, but because you're starting from behind in terms of physical preparation. The question is whether you're willing to do that work, or whether you want to save yourself and your family the embarrassment of washing out halfway through." That night, while the other recruits slept, Maria lay awake staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had brought her to this moment. She thought about her family's disappointment, her community's skepticism, and her own growing doubts about whether she had made a terrible mistake. But she also thought about something that had happened earlier that day during hand-to-hand combat training. The instructor, a compact but incredibly strong sergeant named Rodriguez, had been demonstrating defensive techniques using volunteers from the group. When he called for someone to demonstrate an escape technique, Maria had volunteered without thinking. The exercise involved breaking free from a larger opponent's grip using leverage and technique rather than brute strength. As Rodriguez held her in a simulated chokehold, Maria had applied the technique exactly as demonstrated and successfully broke free on her first attempt. "Outstanding," Rodriguez had said, genuinely impressed. "That was textbook execution. See, recruits, this is what happens when you listen to instruction instead of trying to muscle your way through everything." It was a small moment, but it had given Maria a glimpse of something important. Maybe she couldn't match the men in raw physical strength, but there were other qualities that mattered in military service: precision, intelligence, determination, and the ability to learn quickly and adapt to new situations. The next morning, Maria began implementing her own supplementary training program. While the other recruits relaxed during their brief free time periods, she would find quiet corners of the base where she could do additional exercises. She practiced the combat techniques they learned during the day until they became second nature. She studied the military manuals and regulations until she could recite them from memory. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed by the other recruits. Initially, some of them seemed annoyed by what they perceived as showing off or trying to make them look bad. But as the weeks progressed and Maria's improvement became undeniable, their attitudes began to shift. The turning point came during the 4th week of training, during an exercise designed to test teamwork and problem-solving under pressure. The recruits were divided into squads and given a series of increasingly difficult challenges that required them to work together to achieve their objectives. Maria found herself assigned to a squad led by Peterson, the same recruit who had questioned her presence on the first day. The squad also included Marcus Washington, a former high school football player from Detroit, Tommy Chun, a quiet but incredibly smart young man from California, and Jake Morrison, a farmer's son from Kansas who seemed to possess unlimited physical strength. Their assignment was to navigate an obstacle course while carrying a wounded soldier represented by a 150-pound dummy and all of their equipment. The catch was that they had to complete the course within a strict time limit, and any member of the squad who failed to finish would cause the entire team to fail. The course included rope climbing, wall scaling, muddy trenches, and a river crossing. For the first half of the challenge, Maria struggled to keep up with her larger, stronger teammates. During the wall scaling portion, she needed help from Morrison to reach the top. In the muddy trenches, Washington had to pull her through a particularly difficult section. By the time they reached the river crossing, Maria was exhausted, and she could see frustration building in her teammates' eyes. The river was about 30 feet wide and running fast enough to make crossing dangerous. The official technique involved throwing a rope across and then using it to guide both people and equipment to the other side. Peterson's first 3 attempts to throw the rope across failed, and precious time was slipping away. Washington tried next, but his throws, while powerful, lacked the accuracy needed to secure the rope properly. Chin was too small to generate the necessary distance, and Morrison, despite his strength, couldn't seem to account for the wind that kept blowing his throws off target. With less than 10 minutes remaining and failure seeming inevitable, Maria asked for permission to try. Peterson looked skeptical but handed her the rope, clearly thinking they had nothing to lose at this point. What her teammates didn't know was that Maria had spent countless hours as a child helping her uncle, who worked as a fishing guide, learn to cast lines with precision in difficult conditions. She understood wind patterns, trajectory, and timing in ways that pure strength couldn't achieve. Maria's first throw sailed across the river in a perfect arc, landing exactly where it needed to be. Within minutes, she had secured the rope system that allowed the entire squad to cross safely with all their equipment and the dummy. They completed the course with 2 minutes to spare, and as they crossed the finish line, Peterson looked at Maria with what might have been respect for the first time since they had met. "How did you know how to do that?" he asked as they walked back to the barracks. "My uncle taught me to fish when I was little," Maria replied simply. "Sometimes the skills you need aren't the ones you expect." That evening, something had changed in the dynamics of her squad. They began including her in their conversations and asking for her input on tactical problems. More importantly, they stopped treating her like a liability and began seeing her as a valuable member of the team. But the real test was still ahead. Word had come down that Colonel James Harrison, the base commander, was planning to observe their final training exercises personally. Harrison was a legend in the Army, a man who had served with distinction in 3 different conflicts, and who was known for his uncompromising standards and his ability to see through any pretense or weakness. The rumor among the recruits was that Harrison had specifically requested to observe Maria's training group because he had heard about the unusual situation of a woman completing basic training with the men. Some said he was planning to use her performance as evidence that integrating women into combat roles was a mistake. Others believed he was genuinely curious to see how she would handle the pressure. Either way, Maria knew that her performance during Colonel Harrison's visit would determine not just her own future, but potentially the future of other women who might want to follow in her footsteps. The weight of that responsibility was both terrifying and motivating. As the day of the colonel's visit approached, Maria doubled down on her preparation efforts. She studied every regulation, practiced every technique, and pushed her physical training to new levels. She knew that when the moment came, she would need to be perfect. What she didn't know was that Colonel Harrison had been watching reports of her progress for weeks and had already formed some strong opinions about her potential. The visit wasn't just an observation. It was a test that would determine whether Maria Santos had what it took to serve her country with honor, or whether the doubters had been right all along. Colonel James Harrison arrived at Fort Benning on a gray Tuesday morning that seemed to match the serious nature of his visit. At 52 years old, Harrison commanded respect simply by walking into a room. He had earned his reputation through 3 combat deployments, a Silver Star for bravery under fire, and an unwavering commitment to excellence that had shaped thousands of soldiers over his 28-year career. The colonel's visit had been planned for weeks, but the specific details of what he wanted to observe had been kept secret from both the recruits and most of the training staff. Maria and her fellow trainees only knew that their final evaluation exercises had been moved up by several days, and that they would be performing under the direct observation of the base commander. Drill Sergeant Williams gathered the recruits in the pre-dawn darkness, his usual commanding presence somehow even more intense than normal. "Listen carefully," he announced, his voice carrying across the formation. "Today you will demonstrate everything you have learned over the past 14 weeks. Colonel Harrison will be evaluating your performance, and I want to be absolutely clear about something. There is no room for error today." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. "Some of you will go on to serve with distinction in the United States Army. Others will discover that they are not yet ready for that honor. Today we find out which category each of you falls into." The evaluation was designed to test every aspect of their training: physical fitness, weapons proficiency, tactical knowledge, leadership skills, and the ability to perform under extreme pressure. The recruits would be working in the same squads they had been assigned to for the past month, which meant Maria would once again be working with Peterson, Washington, Chun, and Morrison. The first challenge was a timed physical fitness test that included the standard requirements of push-ups, sit-ups, and the 2-mile run, but with the added complexity of having to complete each component while wearing full battle gear. Maria had improved dramatically since her first weeks of training, but she knew this would still be her most difficult challenge. Colonel Harrison positioned himself near the finish line of the running course, a clipboard in hand, and an expression that revealed nothing about his thoughts or expectations. As the squads lined up for the test, Maria could feel his eyes evaluating each recruit with the kind of attention that missed nothing. The push-up portion went better than Maria had dared hope. Her months of supplemental training had built strength she never knew she possessed, and she completed the required number with time to spare. The sit-ups were similarly successful, and as her squad moved to the running course, Maria felt a cautious optimism building in her chest. The 2-mile run while carrying full gear was a different story entirely. The additional weight of her equipment and weapon transformed what had become a manageable challenge into a grueling test of endurance and willpower. By the halfway point, Maria was falling behind her squad mates, her breathing labored, and her legs feeling like they were filled with concrete. Peterson, who had developed a grudging respect for Maria over the previous weeks, began encouraging her to keep pace. "Come on, Santos," he called back to her. "You've got this. Just put one foot in front of the other." But encouragement alone couldn't overcome the physical reality of the situation. Maria continued to fall further behind, and by the final quarter mile, she was running alone while the rest of her squad had already finished. Colonel Harrison's eyes never left her as she pushed herself toward the finish line, her face contorted with effort and determination. Maria crossed the finish line with just seconds to spare, immediately collapsing to her hands and knees as she struggled to catch her breath. The time was acceptable, barely, but she knew that barely acceptable might not be good enough for someone like Colonel Harrison. The weapons proficiency test went much better. Maria had always been a good student, and her attention to detail and careful practice had made her one of the most accurate shooters in her group. She scored in the top 3 overall, and for the first time that day, she saw what might have been approval in Colonel Harrison's expression. But the real test came during the final exercise of the day, a complex tactical scenario that would require each squad to demonstrate their ability to work as a team under pressure while solving problems and making decisions in real time. The scenario involved a simulated rescue mission. Each squad was given intelligence about a downed pilot who needed to be extracted from behind enemy lines. They had to plan their approach, navigate through hostile territory, locate and secure the pilot, and then extract him to safety, all while avoiding or neutralizing enemy forces played by advanced training instructors. What made the exercise particularly challenging was that it was designed to present each squad with unexpected complications that would test their ability to adapt and improvise. The original plan would inevitably fail at some point, and success would depend on how well the team could adjust their strategy under pressure. Colonel Harrison positioned himself where he could observe the entire exercise, accompanied by several senior officers who had come specifically to witness this unusual evaluation. Maria could feel the weight of their attention as her squad huddled together to plan their approach. Peterson had emerged as the natural leader of their group, but He had learned to value input from all team members. "Okay, here's what we know," he said, spreading out a map of the training area. "The pilot is located approximately 2 kilometers from here, in a valley that's supposed to be crawling with enemy patrols." Chun, whose analytical mind had proven invaluable during training exercises, pointed to several locations on the map. "If we approach from the north, we can use this ridge line for cover until we're within 500 meters of the target. But the extraction point is on the opposite side of the valley, which means we'll have to cross open ground while carrying an injured person." Morrison, ever practical, raised the obvious concern. "That's a lot of exposed terrain to cover. If they have any kind of organized defense, we're going to be sitting ducks." Washington nodded in agreement. "We need a diversion or something to draw their attention away from the extraction route." Maria had been studying the map quietly, and now she spoke up with an idea that surprised even herself. "What if we split into 2 teams? A small group could create a distraction on the eastern side of the valley while the main team approaches from the west. The diversion team wouldn't try to engage, just make enough noise to draw attention and then disappear." Peterson considered the suggestion for a moment. That could work, but it would be risky for whoever's on the diversion team. If they get caught, they're on their own. "I'll do it," Maria said without hesitation. "I'm the smallest and probably the fastest over short distances. I can move through the brush without making much noise, create some kind of disturbance, and then get out before they can pinpoint my location." The rest of the squad exchanged glances. The plan made tactical sense, but it would put Maria in significant danger and separate her from the group's protection. Peterson struggled with the decision, knowing that if something went wrong, he would be responsible. "Are you sure about this?" he asked Maria directly. "Once we split up, we won't be able to help you if things go bad." Maria met his eyes with steady confidence. "I'm sure. This gives us the best chance of completing the mission successfully." 20 minutes later, Maria found herself crouching in thick underbrush on the eastern edge of the valley, watching enemy patrols move through their assigned areas with professional efficiency. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was clear and focused on the task ahead. The plan required precise timing. Her squad would begin their approach to the pilot's location in exactly 10 minutes, which meant Maria needed to create her diversion at exactly the right moment to draw attention away from their route. As she watched the enemy patrols, Maria noticed something that could work to her advantage. One of the training instructors playing an enemy soldier was positioned near a pile of empty ammunition crates that were left over from a previous exercise. If she could reach those crates without being seen, she could create a significant noise by pushing them over, which would sound like someone moving heavy equipment. Moving with painstaking care, Maria began working her way through the underbrush toward the ammunition crates. Every sound seemed amplified in her ears, and several times she had to freeze completely as patrols passed within a few feet of her hiding spot. After what felt like hours, but was actually only 15 minutes, Maria reached the edge of the clearing where the crates were stacked. The timing was perfect. Her squad would be beginning their approach right now, and she needed to create her diversion immediately. Taking a deep breath, Maria burst from her hiding place and shoved the stack of crates as hard as she could. The resulting crash echoed across the valley like thunder, and she could hear shouts of surprise and alarm from multiple directions. But as she turned to flee back into the underbrush, Maria realized she had made a critical error. The noise had been so loud and obvious that the enemy forces immediately knew it was artificial. Instead of running toward the sound to investigate, they were spreading out to search the area systematically, cutting off her planned escape route. Maria found herself trapped in a small grove of trees with enemy forces closing in from 3 sides. Her only option was to head deeper into the valley, moving away from her squad and toward areas she hadn't scouted. It was exactly the kind of situation that could lead to complete mission failure. But instead of panicking, Maria forced herself to think tactically. Her diversion had accomplished its primary purpose. She could see that the main enemy force was now concentrated on her side of the valley, leaving the western approach much more lightly defended. Her squad would have a clear path to the pilot's location. Now she needed to focus on her own survival and eventual extraction. Moving as quietly as possible, Maria began working her way through unfamiliar terrain, using every stealth technique she had learned during training. For the next hour, Maria played a deadly game of cat and mouse with the training instructors, always staying just ahead of their search pattern while gradually working her way toward the designated extraction point. It was exhausting, nerve-wracking work that required constant vigilance and split-second decision-making. Meanwhile, her squad had successfully located the simulated injured pilot and was beginning their extraction. Peterson kept looking in the direction where Maria had disappeared, clearly worried about her fate, but unable to do anything except complete the mission. As Maria approached the extraction point from an unexpected direction, she could see her squad helping the wounded pilot across the final stretch of open ground. They were going to make it, and her sacrifice had been worth it. But Maria's own situation was becoming increasingly desperate. The enemy search pattern had gradually herded her toward the extraction point, and she realized with growing alarm that she was about to walk into what appeared to be an ambush. 3 training instructors were positioned in concealment around the extraction point, clearly waiting for exactly this scenario. If Maria approached directly, she would be captured, which would probably result in mission failure for her entire squad. With only minutes remaining before the exercise deadline, Maria made a decision that surprised everyone watching, including Colonel Harrison. Instead of trying to sneak past the ambush or calling for help from her squad, she decided to turn the tables. Using every bit of tactical knowledge she had absorbed during training, Maria circled around behind the concealed instructors and launched a coordinated attack designed to neutralize all 3 simultaneously. She threw rocks in different directions to create confusion, then moved through their positions with speed and precision, using mock combat techniques to eliminate each instructor before they could react to her presence. It was a bold, aggressive move that demonstrated not just courage, but tactical intelligence and the ability to think creatively under extreme pressure. By neutralizing the ambush, Maria had ensured that her squad could complete their extraction safely. When the exercise officially ended and all participants gathered for the debrief, Colonel Harrison asked Maria to explain her decision-making process during the final phase of the mission. As she described her reasoning and tactical choices, the colonel's expression remained carefully neutral, but several of the other officers began taking notes. "Recruit Santos," Colonel Harrison said when she finished her explanation, "that was an unauthorized deviation from standard extraction procedures. You put yourself at significant additional risk and made tactical decisions that could have resulted in mission failure." Maria felt her heart sink as the colonel's words seemed to confirm her worst fears about her performance. But then, Harrison's expression changed, and for the first time that day, something that might have been a smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. It was also brilliant tactical thinking that demonstrated exactly the kind of initiative and courage we need in our military leaders. He turned to address the entire group of recruits, but his words were clearly meant for Maria. "Today I observed something that many people told me I would never see. I watched a soldier who was physically outmatched by every other member of her unit find ways to contribute that were not just valuable, but essential to mission success." Colonel Harrison paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. Some people questioned whether women belonged in combat roles. Today, Recruit Santos proved that the question was never about gender. It was about character, intelligence, and the courage to excel even when the odds are stacked against you. The silence that followed was profound. Maria felt tears building in her eyes as the full meaning of the colonel's words hit her. She had not just passed the test. She had exceeded every expectation and proven that courage wasn't about being the biggest or strongest person in the room. It was about finding ways to succeed when failure seemed inevitable. Later that evening, as the recruits prepared for graduation ceremonies the following week, Maria received word that Colonel Harrison wanted to speak with her privately. When she reported to his office, she found him reviewing what appeared to be personnel files and recommendation letters. "Sit down, Santos," he said, his tone much less formal than it had been during the exercise. "I want to talk to you about your future in the Army." Maria sat carefully, still not entirely sure whether she was in trouble or being commended. "You've earned the respect of your fellow recruits and your training staff," Harrison continued. "More importantly, You've demonstrated qualities that are rare in soldiers of any gender or background. I'm recommending you for advanced leadership training and potential officer candidate school." The words hit Maria like lightning. Officer candidate school was an opportunity she had never dared imagine might be available to her. "There's something else," Harrison added, pulling out a letter from his desk. "I've been corresponding with your family throughout your training. Your father asked me to give you this when you completed the program." With trembling hands, Maria opened the letter from her father. The words were simple but powerful. "Mija, I was wrong to doubt you. You have shown courage that your old father never possessed, and you have brought honor to our family name. Your mother and I are proud to be your parents, and we will be waiting to celebrate with you when you come home. You are our warrior daughter, and we love you more than words can say." As Maria read the letter, tears finally overflowed from her eyes. All the doubt, all the criticism, all the fear and pain of the past months seemed to wash away in that moment. She had proven herself not just to the army, but to her family and her community. Colonel Harrison cleared his throat, drawing her attention back to the present. "Santos, I want you to know that your performance here will be studied and used as a model for future training programs. You've opened doors that were previously closed, and other young women will have opportunities because of what you've accomplished." He stood up, extending his hand to her in a gesture of respect between equals. "The Army is proud to have you as a soldier, and I'm proud to have witnessed your transformation from a questioned recruit into a proven leader." As Maria shook hands with one of the most respected officers in the Army, she thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. She remembered the scared young woman who had stepped off the bus 14 weeks earlier, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who had discovered that true courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to keep moving forward when fear tried to stop you. Maria Santos had questioned her own courage many times during those difficult weeks, but she had never allowed those questions to defeat her. Now, as she prepared for graduation and the next phase of her military career, Maria knew that she would face many more challenges and many more people who would question whether she belonged in the Army. But she also knew that she had something now that no one could take away from her. Absolute proof that she possessed the courage, intelligence, and determination to succeed in any situation. The girl who had once hidden military recruitment posters under her mattress had become a soldier who would inspire countless others to pursue their own dreams of service and courage. And somewhere in a small town in New Mexico, her family was preparing to welcome home their warrior daughter with the pride and celebration she had earned through her unwavering determination to prove that courage knows no boundaries.